Hey Ben, how's it going?
Hi Alex, I'm good, and you?
Oh, good. I guess, I don't know. I feel like we should just say that this is a special episode because Ben is visiting Wisconsin right now. And so this will be the first episode that we will be recording in person, I guess. So
yeah. I was going to say live, but this isn't live.
No, it's not live, but like without the intermediary of like an avatar. So,
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, how's your trip been so far, Ben?
It's been good. It's always good to come back to Wisconsin. I was I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I was a teaching assistant at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and that's where Alex and I met a few years ago. And so I met my wife there, and then we got married, and then now we live in Paris, and so we come back every so often. And right now, I've always landed, even when I was in Indiana, I always landed at Chicago airport. It feels familiar now. You know, I know the airport, I know which concourse I have to pick up my bags from. And it really feels familiar, you know. And so far the trip has been pretty good. We've seen a lot of family. I have a new niece, so that's very exciting. And
you're going on a tour of Midwestern art museums.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, the Milwaukee one, the Chazen here in Madison, and the Chicago Museum on Monday.
Yeah. I mean, being in Paris, you're kind of spoiled for museums already, but hopefully I think the Chicago Art Museum is one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, what do you like about this one?
I think it's more like an emotional thing because it's just like when I was in high school in my like sophomore year, I think we took like a class trip, and I think it was probably the first time I'd like, you know, been to like a big city, and
cool.
And so we spent the day at the art museum, and then what is the they're kind of most famous well, I also had a terrible experience there one time, which is I was meeting a friend that I had met abroad and who lives in Las Vegas, and she was coming to Chicago. And so we met in the middle, and we got in a fight at the Airbnb.
Oh, shit.
And she like didn't talk to me all day. So we just like walked through different exhibits at the museum, and I just like followed her around.
Well, luckily the museum is big, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we weren't bored. I was just uncomfortable most of the day. But so there's like emotional connections.
Okay, yeah.
But there's also, we just saw a paint, because we also went to the Chazen, which is the University of Wisconsin Art Museum. We saw a pointillist painting, and it made me kind of the most famous painting at the Chicago Art Museum is it's George
Seurat,
mm-hmm. which is the Déjeuner
sur l'herbe.
Sur l'herbe. Yeah.
He did one of those? I thought Courbet did, not Courbet, I forget. So yeah, he made also a déjeuner like that.
Yeah.
And it's featured at the museum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice.
So it's really big. And,
yeah.
But yeah, so that's me in the Chicago Art Museum.
Nice. Well, I hope that I'm going to have other memorable memories. I hope that they are related to art, rather than me arguing with Sam and having to awkwardly follow her around.
That would be uncomfortable, but you know,
but memorable.
Yeah, you won't forget it. Well, it'll be an unforgettable experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today's book, I chose the book.
Mm-hmm. What was our criteria?
Length.
Yeah. So we're both in the middle of the semester right now.
Yeah.
So we decided for something shorter. You also had a copy of this book, right?
Yeah.
That you'd found at a thrift shop or something?
Yeah, there was a yard sale in my neighborhood in Paris. And I was, so I'm really into comedy, and Alex is into comic histories from the 18th century, 16th century.
17.
Almost. Yeah. I was thinking 1600. I'm doing the same mistake that my students do. Oh yeah, the 17th century, 1700s.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bad rule, I'd say.
It's
not my
confusing.
fault.
And so I came across this book, who combines two interests. It's a book from NDiaye called Comédie Classique. And I've been wanting to read more contemporary authors. And I think that NDiaye has quite a strong reputation. And the book is called Comédie Classique, and it's 100 pages long. So I thought, yeah, it would be nice to try out that book, and hopefully we can find things to say about that.
Yeah, and I think we'd also said that this would be the first female author that we will have talked about. So
Yes, that's true.
so to get some gender parity in our
Yes, and racial parity.
and racial parity, yes.
Because she's black. But the book is not at all about that.
No,
But
yeah, surprisingly.
maybe in some way we could maybe relate. I mean, we can talk about that later because, the title is called Comédie Classique, and how should we go about it? Should we start right away?
One of us can just briefly discuss
summarize.
what it's about. Yeah.
So go ahead.
So, well, I mean, I think there are a few interpretations, I guess, of what exactly is going on. But so there's a main character who, so kind of the most striking thing about it formally is that there are no paragraphs. It's one sentence for 105 pages, told from the perspective of a je. We don't know the name of this person. They are an aspiring writer working in their apartment. And I think from one perspective, we can talk about this. So the action told by the narrator takes place over the course of a day. And you can imagine that either they are in their head writing a story, never potentially leaving their apartment, or talking about a variety of different events that happen over the course of the day. So there's the cousin of the narrator named George who's coming to visit. There is a kind of a murder plot between a story of like an inheritance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then something about a friend of George and his girlfriend that are in a potentially relationship.
Yeah.
So there's like these kind of three interweaving kind of narratives that all take place over the course of the day. And yeah, there's kind of an ambiguity, I think, as to whether, the telling of the tale is, whether the narrator is talking about something that actually happened, something that they're imagining over the course of the day in one location. So that was kind of my brief summary of the book. But
yeah, no, that's pretty good. And so yeah, the book it's very short. The story is simple, but at the same time, the way it unfolds, it's more complicated and a little bit confusing. I don't know what was your experience reading it, but for me, it was
challenging.
A bit challenging, yeah. I didn't really. I mean, I don't dislike the book actively, but I didn't either really enjoy the experience. Now, upon thinking about it and starting to talk about it, I have ideas. Okay. So we have to mention as well that we are in the
Historical Society Library at UW-Madison.
So there might be some echo and squeaky chairs.
Yeah, and a random alarm, fire alarm. So, okay.
No, yeah, the book is a little bit confusing, and I think it's interesting in some respects because. So the title is Comédie Classique, and a Comédie Classique relies on specific themes, like family, money issues, inheritance, love relationships, coming of age stories, love interests, and all of these themes are actually in the book. And usually comedies also end up in a marriage, but this comedy ends up with more of a dissolution. Death.
Flame.
Death by flame and the dissolution of the family unit.
Yeah. I was kind of, did you find the book to be funny? Or how are you interpreting comedy, comédie?
I think it's one of these books, and I think we're good at that in France. And when I say that, I'm being ironic, is that when we do funny things, sometimes it's not a laugh out loud funny, Like some American authors who are funny are laugh out loud funny. You take, for example, have you ever read any Thomas Pynchon?
I've not, but you've talked to me about it.
Yeah. This guy he's notoriously known to be difficult. Okay. I don't think he's that difficult, but he's definitely a challenging writer. But there are some set pieces in his narratives that are really slapstick, easy to understand. It's like people would say maybe it's cheap laughters, but I don't think it is. It's genuinely laugh out loud comedies, And I feel like in some writers nowadays who are both comic or have the ambition to be funny, they very often are just they're funny, but it's not really funny. You don't have a bodily reaction when you read them. You see, oh yeah, I see where you're going with that, or I see what you're doing. It is funny, but you don't have that jerk bodily reaction of laughing and being, really enjoying the thing. So yeah, there is some. For example, I can mention.
Yeah.
So, for example, page 32. So it's hard to quote as well because the sentence is 120 pages long. So you have to to carve a chunk a little bit anywhere. So 32 at même si.
I have a different edition.
Oh yeah, okay.
But I'll listen.
Même si, contrairement à Gary Fitzgerald, Humphrey Monroe, qui répondrait à Tracy d'une manière ironique et légère tout en tournant délicatement, pour éviter qu'elle n'épaissit trop vite la sauce aux érelles, devait-elle accompagner l'anguille ou le canton, entre parenthèses, une remarque analogue de la part de Sophie qui, du temps peut-être, quoi que j'en dise, heureusement passé, où mes ambitions artistiques non encore bafouées par le moindre échec et ma formidable assurance de faire un jour ou l'autre élogieusement parler de moi, l'entraînait à se croire plus amoureuse de ma personne qu'elle ne l'avait jamais été du prestigieux et vil directeur de revue dont je me trouvais être, à ma grande confusion, l'humble successeur. So here, I think that's one of the passages that I enjoyed the most and I think it works pretty well because you have all this delayed, there's a lot of, how do you say, incision? Like
insight?
No, like in grammar, or appositional clauses. Is that a word? Appositive. It's like you add stuff in between two clauses.
Okay.
So, for example, you see, pour éviter qu'elle n'épaissit trop vite la sauce aux érelles, entre parenthèses, devait-elle accompagner, no, so this is apositional. Une remarque analogue de la part de Sophie qui, comma, du temps peut-être, comma, quoi que j'en dise, comma, heureusement passé, comma. So here we have a lot of bits of sentences that are interposed and that delay the conclusion of the sentence. And that I think is a comic device that I usually enjoy because you can see the narrator trying to play with the expectation of the readers. And then what I enjoyed a little bit less, it's the classic trope of the writer, the failing writer or failing artist who is a little bit bitter about his own destiny but at the same time, we see that here the woman, he reminisces on the part that Sophie, his love interest, loved him more than she thought she did, because she saw him as an aspiring writer, you know. And so there's all these layers. So technically speaking, I found it funny, but thematically speaking, I wasn't very. It just left me a little bit cold. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one of the things that I think is challenging about it, so yeah, it's one sentence, it's 105 pages long. There are no sitting points, like no paragraph breaks, no chapters, and those you kind of realize as you're reading through, those are the kind of moments where you pause and take stock of what's going on and you try to work things out. And here, it's clearly a formal choice. I think there's a sense of disorientation that's like built into that I think is part of the aesthetic that she's going for. But yeah, I guess in terms of the theme, I was less interested in that than like the formal aspects of it, or what she appeared to be trying to do. Because I think there's some ambiguity, like in the, I don't know for you, Ben, like does comédie, could that mean like theater as well, like theatrical? Because you know, Comédie Classique, it's this, there's a sense of, or if we're thinking of like Comédie Classique, like French classical theater, this idea of like the, you know, les trois unités, which would be like, you know, this is a narrative that takes place over the course of one day, and possibly like in one place, if we consider that, you know, this is the author who is, you know, working through something like in their head. Because I was that something that you like considered, that that's like what's going on, or that the passage that kind of made me think that this is potentially what was going on. It's near the beginning of the book. So, tout en explorant avec un douillet plaisir les perspectives de la journée à venir que je voyais alors, sans plus me rappeler les déceptions du jour précédent pareillement grossi au matin d'événements improbables, et parce que j'ai envisagé certaines réussites, certains coups de veine que je ne, certains coups de veine qui n'eussent pu être dans ma situation, car j'ai rarement de la chance que miraculeux, infiniment plus riche et agréable qu'il ne s'avérerait définitive. I think there's an idea, what this kind of seems to me is like, she's trying to pack, or the narrator is trying to explore possibilities of this kind of wild day of all these like events that are being packed in. So there's kind of a tension between this idea that all this needs to happen in one day. Mm-hmm. There's these like three different narratives that are kind of being intertwined, and so I don't know, I think...
Yeah, but that's interesting, yes, because if you read the last pages, the narrator says, blah, 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 blah.
Because like the narrator is saying that, you know, these are possible things that could happen in the future. And so like, from that perspective, you could think of the whole thing as like them projecting into this day, potentially just like sitting at their kitchen table or something and never really leaving their apartment. But the narrative itself is quite mobile, because they're going to all these different streets, and there's like there's comings and goings, and yeah, so the narrative itself that's told does not take place in one place, but
it does take place in Paris.
Yeah.
And it does take place in one place. It's the space of the sentence. So what I thought, like, because I also like this Comédie Classique thing, also made me think about the three units, you know, action, space, and time.
Yeah.
And basically, we have here we have one sentence.
So there's unity.
And that to me that would be the unity. But to go back to the sort of metatextual comment you were saying, like, yeah, the day begins by what you said, and then one of the last words is cette journée était la plus éprouvante qu'il m'eût été donné de vivre. So we could also consider the fact that the narrator that went through all these events imagining them, or the writer imagining them and having to write about it and to make them fit into one sentence.
Qui me t'était meaning could have been.
Oh no, that's that
Or
I have
that
ever
have been,
had.
that I've ever had.
Yeah.
Qui me t'était donné de vivre. Forced by like their ambition as a writer, you mean?
Yeah, something like that. Like if we read the beginning of the book as a narrator trying to make some events fit, to think about or a writer trying to think about what they're going to write, then I think it makes sense that by the end, all of this is the most exhausting thing that they had to go through.
Mm.
Especially
writing it down.
Yeah.
Mm.
Crafting and putting it together and then writing it down. And I read that this was her first novel, actually. And
so she was 20 years old.
She was 20 years old, I think. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's really good.
Yeah.
And but one point I think is interesting is the style. You mentioned a little bit earlier before we started recording, like she's always using the imparfait du subjonctif.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the style is very, very stereotypical, and very classic in a sense where it's almost a pastiche of the idea of a book that is set in Paris, of like the first book of the Parisian arriving, the provincial person arriving to Paris.
The Balzacian kind of.
Yeah, there's something like that. I don't know, like, what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that. I felt that classicism in the style of the prose, but felt obviously some tension with the fact that it's this one long sentence, and I don't know if there is this thing that she's creating, like if there's a tension between this kind of not crazy, it's almost conventional actually, but like this kind of like formal constraint of like one sentence, this kind of modernist, I'd say, like
mm-hmm.
idea of like this kind of writing as a sort of game or like a défi, like a challenge of some sort, pairing it with like this kind of classical turn of phrase, I would say, like if there's kind of an intentional, like if that's one of the tensions that she's like working off of in this novel, this kind of classic turn of phrase with this kind of formalist.
And there's also like a strange choice of words. For example, so so like a minute ago I was finding them. So the narrator uses words like aigrefin, cramoisi, quelque peu, le poste de télévision instead of saying TV. There's all these ways of speaking that
seem archaic or like off-center.
Yeah, that seem like it's the idea that you have of someone who is bookish that speaks, or a character that comes across as bookish.
Yeah.
And I think it's very intentional in the sense that this book, to me, it sounds like a collage of a classical comedy put together in one sentence, and it feels almost as if the book is like Mary NDiaye being a writer and being constrained maybe with all the past of French writers writing their novel when they arrive in Paris. I had to struggle.
The thing that's interesting about that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the thing that was striking me was, the novel begins where the narrator is imagining this novel that they're going to write. And, it's not their great, like, Parisian novel. It's this, like, kind of, I don't know, like a crime novel taking place in Brooklyn with, like, these American characters. And so a story that seemed to me, like, conventional, but maybe not, something that you would expect a Parisian writer to dig into in their first like novel or something. So there was something kind of weird about this idea of like parody and convention. I think it sounds like she actually wants to write like the great American novel.
Yeah.
But she's like,
But she has to
French.
write the Parisian novel.
Yeah.
She's settling down for for the same bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, like she, the story that she kind of starts sketching out. Well, and by the way, the narrator is masculine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm talking about the masculine narrator, but the story that is sketched out is rather schematic, and it's soon kind of taken over by these other like plot threads going on. And so, I don't know if like there is this kind of, if it's also something about convention. I don't know. I do think there's this idea of like conventionality, this idea of like, what would a great novel be? Oh, it would be in like Brooklyn and be like crime. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
this kind of idea of working with different conventions, including like, an inheritance dispute and an infidelity, like the possibility of like an infidelity. So I don't know. These are kind of like classical like literary themes, I'd say.
Yeah.
That, as you were saying, it's either like a pastiche or almost like a parody. The fact that they're all kind of like cataloged here and like woven together in a way that's kind of incongruous, I'd say.
No, yeah, you're right. It's definitely more of a parody than a pastiche, because there's the intent of making people laugh, but it's not a hardcore parody in the sense that it also pays homage, or is very, I think, self-aware of all those different traditions. And also NDiaye being, so I think this was published in the 90s or something?
Late 80s, I think.
Yeah, late 80s. So she was probably influenced, by writers such as Paul Auster, or
for the New York story.
yeah.
Sort of thing.
I mean, when I hear Brooklyn and 80s, 90s, I'm thinking about Paul Auster.
Yeah.
But if not him, at least the American tradition. A lot of French writers and American writers have been enmeshed together for at least 100 years. Ever since the American writers started coming to Paris in the 20s, if not earlier, but I don't really have any knowledge about that. And there's a bit of English in the book as well. Bits and dialogues and.
Well, from a trip to London, right?
From a trip to London. Yeah.
But I don't know. Speaking about these influences, did you catch this part where?
No, go.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
the writer.
Oh yeah. I highlighted that.
So we kind of know very little about what do we know about the narrator, that they're
Not much.
not much, that they're they're an autodidact. We assume that they kind of come from a rich-ish family or something like that, because there's this like inheritance dispute, and that they have like literary ambitions, but they're also like struggling with money. So it's this kind of classic like starving artist sort of thing. And this kind of reivindicative toward the end, this kind of, I don't know if it's a statement of purpose, but this kind of something you'd think like a young person might, going into literature for the first time, might think like of all these this kind of revolutionary opposition to like all of these kind of model like literary figures. So they're talking, I'll just read kind of this, what I kind of took as like an internal dialogue of the narrator, but quant à Flaubert, un tâcheron surfait, mais Zola, basse-contre d'opérette. Ne me dis pas que Proust, un narcotique, et Joyce, ce pédant illisible. Mais alors, la littérature, elle commence, entre parenthèses, avec moi.
Yeah, that was funny. That's one of the passages that I really liked.
So yeah, I mean, I don't really know like what to, I guess we'd think of Flaubert as kind of beginning like the modernist kind of trend. So all of these, I don't know, Zola doesn't exactly he definitely talks about the modern world. I don't know that I think of him as like a modernist per se, but Flaubert, Proust, Joyce, these all very like formally, with kind of a lot of original like
innovation,
I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I accusing Joyce of unreadability, like writing this novel that is itself pretty, difficult to penetrate, I would say,
Yeah.
or at least to work out the.
But also that's the classical reproach that is being given to these writers. When I started Ulysses once, and I was like, shit, this shit is unreadable.
Yeah.
Flaubert is famous for working a lot, and a lot of people, don't want to equate like working hard and for long hours with genius, but at the same time, Flaubert is always the example that is put out, saying, you see, like if you work a lot, then you get Madame Bovary or something. Zola,
Basse contre d'opérette.
Basse contre d'opérette, yeah, somebody who is ridiculous, and Proust, narcotic, yeah, it puts you to sleep.
Yeah.
So,
well, but that's funny too, because reading the opening lines of this are kind of like,
yeah.
Did you catch that as like a pastiche of Proust?
That's true, yeah.
Which is just not the opening sentence, but plus je réfléchissais et plus s'installait en moi la conviction que ce fut lors d'instants de calme et de détente, tel celui du réveil, cette tranquille matinée d'automne quand pelotonnait entre mes couvertures pleines d'une douce tiédeur de cocon, ou du nid garni d'un clair duvet, comme on en découvre parfois à la campagne au fond des boîtes aux lettres. Donc, so it's it's this kind of awakening.
Yeah, but that's. Yeah. I mean, I agree 100%. I didn't catch that, but in the recherche, the narrator goes to sleep.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And here it's the other way around.
Yeah. So he's like kind of entering into like a dream in this. Well, yeah, that is kind of interesting. Like this is because this I'm reading is kind of like a waking dream in some ways.
Yeah. But we're in the same space of the bed, the space of being comfortable, and in this like liminal world in between being awake or being asleep, and here obviously we'd be in the world of the fiction and reality.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess from that perspective, thinking about like kind of the comic element, there is like an element of if not like homage, like definitely like a parody going on.
Yeah, and I don't think I wrote pastiche in my notes, but I think pastiche is when, I don't mean to suggest that you don't know the definition,
Well, we might not have the same one, so I'll let you know if I don't agree.
I'm sure you've read all Gérard Genet's books. You are the PhD student. Pastiche is when one copies the style of a work without any intention of being necessarily funny. So usually it will be more homage, whereas parody is definitely there's more of a comic element. And
ludic or like
what?
Like ludique, like
it could be either playful or satirical. I think here it's not really satirical. It's more ironical or maybe playful, and also it pays tribute, I think, in a backhanded way to that kind of Paris novel.
Yeah. That's interesting. We've got. Yeah, we do. We have this kind of opening that recalls Proust. Well, I guess Balzac's not written there, but I don't know.
It's funny.
I don't know if that is like a key or something, like to decoding like the different. I didn't actually think of that, but there might be something, laid out in those different references specifically to like Flaubert, Zola, Proust, things that she's, referencing specifically like throughout the text, but that would require, additional readings because this part, it comes right at the end.
Yeah.
So you can kind of look back and think, but.
Yeah, the characters as well, so we have the narrator who is in a relationship with a girl named Sophie. He has a friend named Fausto.
Or George does, right? Or somebody. Anyway, Fausto, sorry.
Yeah, then George is the cousin.
Yeah, okay.
The narrator's cousin. There is a former girlfriend called Emily. And there's who gets together with Fausto without the narrator knowing about it and is feeling a little awkward about that. He has a grandma I mentioned. His dad died. And there's his mom as well, his mother.
And sister Judith.
Oh, yes, and the sister Judith. Yeah, every time all these characters are mentioned, I feel like they don't have a lot of depth to
There's
them.
not like a psychological coherence. It's all like these kind of conventional like plot elements that are kind of
almost classical.
Yeah, or like archetypal or something. Yeah. That were not really meant to. Yeah, I don't know. It's like on one hand, I'm trying to gauge like what my experience of like reading this is, like whether it's immersive or like it's a novel that you can't really, it's difficult to be absorbed into the world, and you'd think potentially the opposite because it's, this kind of like flowing text where you really have to, it's like a drown or swim kind of thing, or, it was constantly kind of held at a distance, I'll say, by kind of that formal element of it. And I think, the characters are kind of built in such a way that we can't really attach ourselves to them, and we kind of continue to just kind of flow through as if they were just these kind of passing ideas. And I mean, that's kind of what's suggested at the beginning, that the narrator is imagining these possible things that could happen throughout the day. And so it doesn't feel structured. It doesn't feel particularly like thought through in advance. There's this kind of almost not stream of consciousness exactly, but this kind of like continual like invention. And obviously that doesn't lend, or that method doesn't necessarily lend itself to, psychological depth, but it's kind of reflected in like the characters as well.
Yeah, and also the way it's put together, it feels like a collage where sometimes you see in a painting, for example, in Cubist paintings, you will see a piece of an object that's enough to suggest the whole object. So then you reconstruct the thing in your head, and so it's like, it's almost like a metonymy. And so I feel like a lot of the plot here is just mentioning things. And then and then if you understand what the thing is, then you reconstruct it. So for example, like you said, the characters don't have a lot of psychological depth, and even the story is not like, the descriptions there's very few, I think, descriptions, or quite limited. So it's really a novel that the reader has to take the time to rebuild in their head, in their mind, so that the power of a joke, for example, of evocation. The couple of passages that we quoted, I think, were pretty strong, because they're the ones that rely as little as possible on that kind of technique. These passages are the passages that rely on this technique but have the biggest payoff. When you mention a list of very famous author names attached to the one criticism that every high school student says, then it's kind of strong and it's easy to pick out. Yeah, but in other passages, when you see, for example, when you have the narrator see that girl getting together with his friend without him knowing, you smile a little bit, but I don't think it's that powerful. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have like it's not the big payoff of having a whole play being written around the trope of the Marie Cocu, the cuckold. And so that's what I think left me frustrated, is because this aesthetic choice, it just compiles a lot of things and it condenses them, and you don't see everything laid out.
Yeah, it feels like an
unfolding.
exercise.
Yeah, me too. I felt a lot like that. It felt like, okay, I want to be a writer. Every writer writes their Paris novel.
Yeah.
I'm gonna show them that mine is. I'm gonna do like a montage or a collage. I'm gonna do a pretty good job, and then fuck this and do something else.
Yeah.
Because I think the book is good. You know, it's just. Have you read anything else from NDiaye?
I read La Divine.
Yeah.
Which is kind of I don't know. It's almost like. Well, it's much more structured. There's like, it's almost like a kind of magical realist novel. There's like these kind of, I think it's again like an infidelity, a story of like infidelity. I think the main character comes from, would it be Algeria, but is having these kind of ghosts from her past that are kind of like literal, that are coming into her life and informing her about kind of her present. So there's kind of like a magical, well, I don't know if you would call that magical realism, but kind of a supernatural element. But that all depends on kind of a sort of realism that, it's obviously not, there's kind of like social realism in that novel. There's a lot of, like clearly a political and social kind of intention in it. But yeah, it's interesting that I don't really see it at all in this one. But.
Yeah. I haven't read anything else from her, but I did live through a couple of her books, and her style is very different. So
than what is in this book?
Than this book, yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious that she settled for something different. But to me, this book felt a bit like an exercise. Really well done, but it's more the aesthetic choices that left me a little cold, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, I think we reached the end.
Yeah, we've exhausted this. No, there's probably more stuff to look at, but
no, yeah, I think that's a good book for a master's thesis.
Yeah,
because it needs at least 4 or 5 readings to be able to exhaust it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing though, like when you think of something as being an exercise, like sometimes you think, is it worth 4 or 5 readings, you know? Yeah. Not that this is bad, but it's just, is it something that would hold up to that? So that would be an interesting question, you know?
Yeah.
Like how intentional or not even intentional, like just how, is there kind of like a hidden structure or something? I don't know exactly, but yeah, no, that would be interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So if anyone writes their master's thesis on this book,
you should pick this one.
Yeah.
That's one of them.
Or you can put us in your bibliography.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to go get some beers.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.